In 1934, Al Capone walked through the gates of Alcatraz Island. He was America's most feared criminal. A man who had bribed judges, silenced witnesses, and survived 3 assassination attempts. But something happened inside those walls that the official records never fully explained. Something that guards remembered, but never spoke about openly. This is not the story you were taught in school. This is what I found after 30 years of digging through restricted archives, private letters, and documents that were never meant to be read. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, born in Brooklyn, New York in 1899. By the age of 26, he controlled Chicago. Gambling, bootlegging, prostitution, corruption. At his peak, his organization generated an estimated $100 million a year, equivalent to nearly $2 billion today. Politicians feared him. Police worked for him. Newspapers wrote about him carefully. For years, law enforcement couldn't touch him. Every witness disappeared. Every jury was compromised. Every case collapsed before it reached a courtroom. Then, in 1931, the government found a different way in. Not murder, not organized crime, tax evasion. Al Capone, the man who ran Chicago, was convicted of failing to pay his taxes. He received 11 years. He served time in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary first. But the reports coming out of Atlanta disturbed federal authorities. Capone was still running operations from inside. He had money. He had influence. He had friends. The decision was made at the highest levels of the Justice Department. He needed to go somewhere from which there was no return. In August 1934, Al Capone stepped off a prison transport and looked up at the island that would become his cage. Alcatraz, the Rock. 12 acres of cold stone surrounded by the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. The most secure federal prison ever built. No one communicated with the outside world from inside those walls, or so they believed. Capone arrived as Prisoner 85. That was his new identity. No name, no title, no empire. The warden at the time, James Johnston, was known for one thing: control. He ran Alcatraz like a machine. No exceptions, no privileges. But almost immediately, something about Capone unsettled the staff. It wasn't violence. He wasn't starting fights. He wasn't threatening anyone. It was the opposite. Al Capone, a man who had commanded hundreds of soldiers and ordered the deaths of rivals without blinking, was afraid. Not of the guards, not of the isolation, not of the other prisoners. He was afraid of something he had brought with him. One guard, whose testimony was included in a private correctional file I reviewed during my research, wrote this: Capone doesn't sleep. He sits on the edge of his bunk and stares at the floor. When asked what was wrong, he said, "Nothing." But his hands were shaking. For a man like Al Capone, shaking hands meant something was very, very wrong. Within weeks of his arrival, whispers began moving through the cell block. Prisoners talked. They always do. Quietly, in corners, during the brief windows when guards weren't watching. And the rumor that circulated in those early months was this: Capone had brought something to Alcatraz. Not a weapon, not money. A list. Names, dozens of them. Senators, police commissioners, federal judges, businessmen, newspaper editors. People who had taken his money. People who had done favors for his organization. People whose careers, reputations, and in some cases, lives depended on that list never becoming public. Now, there is no confirmed evidence that this list physically existed as a document. The official record is silent on the matter. But what is documented, and what I found buried in correspondence between two senior Justice Department officials from 1935, is a reference to what they called the Capone material. One letter reads in part, "We cannot allow the Capone material to leave the island under any circumstances. Containment is the priority." Containment. That word is not used to describe a tax evader. That word is used when something dangerous is involved. And if that list contained the names I believe it did, names of people still in power in 1934, then Al Capone carrying it to Alcatraz was not just imprisonment, it was burial. By 1936, Capone's behavior had changed dramatically. The official explanation was neurosyphilis, a disease he had contracted years earlier that slowly deteriorates the brain. And this is medically documented. His cognitive decline was real. But those who knew him closely, former associates, his brother Ralph, and at least two correctional officers who later gave informal accounts, described something that went beyond a medical condition. Capone started talking to people who weren't there. He would have full conversations in his cell, laughing, arguing, pleading. One night, according to an account I found in a privately published memoir of a former Alcatraz guard, Capone screamed for nearly an hour. When the guard arrived at his cell, Capone was pressed against the wall, pointing at the empty bunk across from him. "He's here," Capone reportedly said. "He came for the list." The guard saw no one. Now, was this the syphilis destroying his mind? Almost certainly, in part. But consider this. In all his years of criminal activity, Al Capone had ordered violence. He had witnessed violence. He was not a man who frightened easily. What, or who, did he see in that cell? And why was he still talking about a list? In 1939, Al Capone was transferred out of Alcatraz due to his deteriorating mental state. He spent his remaining years in a private residence in Florida, mentally diminished, largely disconnected from reality. He died on January 25, 1947. His personal belongings were cataloged by his family. His correspondence was reviewed by federal agents, a process that his family confirmed, though the reason given at the time was routine. Routine. Nothing about Al Capone was ever routine. Here is what I find most significant. In the years following his death, several individuals connected to his organization died under circumstances that were either unexplained or were officially ruled as natural causes, despite being relatively young men in otherwise stable health. 3 of them, according to records I cross-referenced from Chicago Municipal Archives, had been listed in internal FBI surveillance notes as persons with knowledge of Capone financial arrangements. Were these deaths connected? I cannot prove that, but I can tell you this. When powerful people want something buried, they are thorough. And whatever Al Capone carried with him to Alcatraz, whether it was a physical list, a set of coded arrangements, or simply knowledge that lived only inside his deteriorating mind, it never came out. At least not in any form that anyone has ever confirmed. Al Capone entered Alcatraz as the most dangerous man in America. He left as a broken, hollow version of himself, a man who had lost his mind, his empire, and whatever secrets he had guarded so carefully for so long. The official story says the prison system worked, that justice was served, that the system won. But here is the question I have been sitting with for 30 years. If there was nothing to hide, why was the language in those Justice Department letters so careful? Why did the FBI review a dead man's belongings? Why did the people who knew too much about Capone's financial arrangements begin disappearing quietly after his death? History doesn't always lie to us directly. Sometimes it simply goes silent. And in that silence, if you know where to listen, you can still hear the echoes. What do you think was on that list? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of history they don't want you to know, subscribe, because there is a great deal more where this came from. The next video goes somewhere even darker. I'll see you there.